Hi, my name is Heather Breedlove, and today I'm going to be teaching a revision strategy to help the students improve their leads. Okay, boys and girls, for the past few weeks we've been working on personal narratives, and personal narratives are stories about ourselves. So in your writer's notebooks you have a really good collection of stories that you've written about yourselves. What we're going to do today is work on a revision strategy to improve the beginnings of your stories. So what I wanted to talk about are leads. Leads hook the reader. When you write a good lead, it gets the reader's attention and makes them want to read the rest of your story. So can someone raise their hand and tell me what again is a lead? Right. It is how you begin your story. Now, the different types of leads that we're going to be talking about this week are dialogue, which you all know is talking. We're going to talk about a lead that can start with a sound effect. We are going to talk about leads that start with action. And also, another type of lead we're going to be talking about is one that starts with an interesting detail. So what I did today was I brought a few examples of books with interesting and maybe not so interesting leads, and I want you to be thinking when I read you the beginning if this is an interesting lead or if it's not so interesting. So if you think that it's a good lead, put your thumb up. If you think it's not a great lead, then put your thumb down. All right, the first one we're going to start with is Old Yeller. We called him Old Yeller. The name had sort of a double meaning. One part meant that his short hair was a dingy yellow, a color that we called yeller in those days. The other meant that when he opened his head, the sound he let out came closer to being a yell than a bark. So do you think that that's a good lead or a bad lead? Right, that's a good lead, and it is because it starts with an interesting detail. It makes us want to learn more about Old Yeller. Okay. The second one we're going to look at is Magic Tree House, American Revolution. In the 1700s, our country was not called the United States. Instead of states, America was divided into 13 colonies. A colony is land that is owned by another country. Now, do you think that this is an interesting lead, or do you think it's not so interesting? Right, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs down. It's not the most interesting lead. It doesn't really have anything unique that grabs our attention. The next one we are going to look at is in Esperanza Rising. Papa handed Esperanza the knife. The short blade was curved like a scythe, its fat wooden handle fitting snugly in her palm. This job was usually reserved for the eldest son of a wealthy rancher, but since Esperanza was an only child and Papa's pride and glory, she was always given the honor. So do you think that this is a good lead or a bad lead? Right, this is another example of an interesting lead because we kind of want to find out what is she going to be doing with this knife. This one is kind of an action lead. All right, the last story we're going to look at today is called Crazy Lady. And once again, I want you to think about, is this interesting or not so interesting? Sometimes I still dream about them, even though it's been 2 years since it happened, I told Miss Annie. I dream she's walking down the street right in the middle like she always did, with Ronald on her arm. Okay, so that one starts with dialogue. Do you think that that's a good lead, or do you really not want to read much more of this? Right, it's a pretty good lead because we want to know what this boy's talking about. Okay, well what we're going to do now is I have the beginning of my story narrative that I wrote a couple days ago. And I'm going to reread the beginning because that's what good writers always do before they start revising. You always have to reread your story. So what I'm going to do is read this out loud to you, and I want you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you think it's an interesting lead or if it could use improvement. All right. It was a hot summer day, so my sister and I went to the beach. When we arrived, I noticed the sun sparkling on the waves. I can't wait to get in, I exclaimed. If you think this is a good lead, put your thumb up. All right, there's a few thumbs. If you don't think it's a very good lead, put your thumb down. Right. I'm thinking this is not a very good lead. It's kind of boring. So now I need to think, if we've talked about these types of leads, what would make my story more interesting? I think I'm going to use dialogue. So let's see. I need to think of a way to show that it was a hot summer day instead of just telling you that it was a hot summer day. So let's see. I'm going to start just by crossing off my first sentence, because the rest of it's pretty good. So, oh, I have an idea. It's sweltering out here. Lindsay complained. I'm sweating buckets. I agreed. Why don't we go to the beach? Don't want to forget my quotation marks. I replied, sounds good. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to reread that one more time, and let's see if that sounds a little bit better. It's sweltering out here, Lindsay complained. I'm sweating buckets. I agreed. Why don't we go to the beach? I replied. Sounds good. Oh, I better say who's saying that. Sounds good. My sister said. When we arrived, I noticed the sun sparkling on the waves. I can't wait to get in, I exclaimed. So that's a much better example of a lead. That kind of is going to want to make you read more of the story as opposed to the first one. Now, can someone raise their hand and tell me what type of lead I just used? Right, I used dialogue. I started with someone talking. Now what I want you to do is take out your writer's notebooks and choose one of the narratives that you've been working on the past few weeks and try to use one of these examples of a lead. You can talk to the people at your table if you need some ideas or some help, and also we can meet at the table with a small group if you need some extra help. Before we end today, we're going to come back together. I'll let some people share their leads, and we'll review one more time what makes a good lead.